And we are recording. Jay, thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure thing. Great to
It's
be here.
great to reconnect with you.
Sure, folks listening might know me from one of my other careers. So I have these two main careers where I'm a journalist on the one hand on CNN and in various magazines, and then on the other hand, the rabbi and meditation teacher, which is already a strange combination. I was the one thing I was the thing I was referring to was just there was like near physical altercation on the floor of the U.S. Senate a few days ago, and I was brought on to wonder what these guys were thinking. Like they literally almost started a fight on the floor of the Senate, and it was fascinating to just see the sort of frustrated masculinity of these two guys. Like they were like acting like 12-year-olds at a playground, like challenging each other to a fight, completely forgetting the kind of power that they each had and the context where it was and how ridiculous they seemed. I'm sure to some people they seemed maybe strong, but to many of us they just seemed absurd. And yet they didn't see it that way. They were so in that moment of being heated and
Yeah.
elevated. And I'm fascinated by that too. I'm fascinated by the way in which our human brains often take us to some very weird places. And to me, what those guys were doing on the Senate floor was every bit as weird as some strange mystical experience that I describe
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah, that was wild. So you said you were involved in that or brought into the
No, I was just brought in. I was just one of the commentators on that issue. I talk about all kinds of stuff, but
what did you
that's
make of
just
all that? This was, and just for context for the listeners, so this was, if you could give the context and the recap there.
yeah. There's a U.S. senator and a union leader, head of the Teamsters, have been fighting online for 6 months or so. And there's actually an interesting issue behind the fight, which is the union leader. The unions have been in trouble for the last few decades, but this year they've had a banner year, successful strikes against the auto industry and two in Hollywood. And I think that's really caused a lot of concern among some conservative folks. And so this guy, the senator, he started a business and he was complaining about unionization, and the union guy was calling him out and got to name calling. And at one point, the union guy was like, "Oh, but we can settle this anytime, any place." Like on this, he said this on Twitter. And so now at the hearing, there was the senator, and you said we could settle this anytime, any place. This is a time, this is a place. Let's do it now. And it was this kind of absurd moment. I really think that it ended up being Senator Bernie Sanders who tried to calm him down, actually, which is pretty interesting that Bernie, who's actually obviously very pro labor in his politics, was like, calm down. You're a United States senator. Why don't you act with some dignity and self respect? And
Wild.
they did not come to blows, but seemed like had it not been for Bernie, they might have. They both stood up and they were like, again, it took me back to really literally in junior high school. Like I remember those playground or whatever recess fights were like the highlight of the day. You would like hope that one would happen because it was so boring otherwise. And yeah, these guys are in their 50s or 50s, 60s, and they're like grown men. I assume they have kids and stuff. I was like, what the hell? It's fat.
Wild.
It's really wild.
What'd you make of all that?
For me, it is something about we are in a weird moment for American masculinity, right? Like things are changing, and some guys are so like profoundly not okay with that. And there was a moment there are some people who feel like it's not okay to be masculine in a more traditional sense, which does involve some like getting in touch with aggression and that power. But I don't think it's not when there's attacks on toxic masculinity, that's not attacks on masculinity. There are great ways to be masculine, to take responsibility, to provide for others, to be strong when needed, but also to be able to be sensitive, to be able to listen. But I do recognize, to me, that whole interchange was about like old school guys trying to be tough, like for political grandstanding, maybe, or for their own psychological gratification. But it's tied to this sort of general feeling of I have to fall back on this very kind of basic form of masculinity. Whereas to really man up in that situation would be to grow up. For heaven's sakes, get over it. Yeah, we all have there are plenty of people who I want to punch in the face, but like you get as a man, there's like traditional masculinity is mastering those inclinations, not giving in to everyone. That's what kids do, right? When you're a real man, or I would say a real person, but let's just stay with masculinity. You're a real man, you feel a lot of things, right? But real strength is not being controlled by every impulse that pulls you one way or the other. So someone might feel a desire to like, let's settle this like men and fight on the floor of the US Senate. But hopefully a wiser part, like masculinity for me also involves wisdom. And it's like there's a wiser part, which is okay, I might be feeling that, but let's be a grown up here. Let's really man up, which means
Yeah.
not be an idiot. And like I said, their disagreement is a real one. and a pretty important one for millions of Americans, right? What's the right relationship of workers to business owners? Is it true Republicans would say that unions make it harder for businesses to thrive? Democrats or more pro union people would say that businesses are often exploiting their workers. That's two really valid sides to a really important issue for millions, hundreds of millions of people. And so there is a real thing there. And to see it degenerate into like first into name calling and then literally into a playground fight is I think you guys have lost the thread. Like we need like there's like a profound disagreement that's a really important one about something that's super important to people's lives. That's what we should be focused on.
Absolutely. Yeah, wild. And earlier that day, you had the one congressman who elbowed the other one.
Yeah, that was wild too. That one, I'm still a jury is still out on that one. I don't know what happened. Like, was Kevin McCarthy elbowing or not elbowing? But even then, it was this like, I don't know. In one sense, it's a return to form. If you look in the 19th century, there were all of these congressmen and members of the Senate who were getting into fistfights and getting censured or expelled or something for having fights on the floor. I just thought maybe we'd moved on beyond that. But there is a rage in America that is palpable. And it's interesting that you see it, I think, on all sides of the political spectrum, among all different people of all different backgrounds, and for a lot of different reasons. And I don't think anyone can say that it was a single cause, whether it's post COVID or whether it's perceived loss of status within America, people who used to have status and think they don't have status, or changes in America itself, or whether it's TikTok's fault or whatever. But there are a lot of different causes, but we see it a lot. There was like a crazy, like violent riot in Union Square because an influencer said he was going to give away some tech equipment. Then he ran out and people went bananas and they like started bashing in the windows of cars and went totally crazy. And
Wow.
that was really like bizarre. It was like this strange thing. It was about two months ago, I think. And this kind of like incredible overreaction. And but that's just one example. There was that incident on the dock, and what part of the country was that? Where there was like the boat that was trying to dock, and it practically the dock worker said no, and then people attacked the dock worker. It was just like this crazy situation. Also, and there it was racialized, and there was like it was like people against white people fighting on this dock, and it was like this horrible incident that really galvanized people. And this does seem to keep happening, not just on the floor of the Senate, but around in our country. I don't think it's just a matter of having access and reporting of these things. There does seem to be this moment, and it's a scary moment.
Where is it leading?
Oh, I don't never tell the future, especially not on a podcast, because then I'll be totally wrong. I think there's clearly the real risk of real violence in the upcoming presidential election, assuming it's Biden and Trump. It is terrifying to contemplate. People who thought that January 6th was a good idea and who have a lot of weaponry around them. And look, we've been torn apart, occasional violence, but certainly heated rhetoric around around the war in the Middle East. And we don't seem to be doing very well on toning down the rhetoric there either. And it's just we're in this period where people seem to go to 11. Some of it is like the impact of social media, like you're rewarded for what gets the most, even most views and the most clicks, and that's what gets people the most angry, what most gets them most riled up. But I don't think it's reducible to that. I think there is this moment of anger and frustration, but we've been there before. I don't remember the 70s, but I remember in the 1970s, there's that movie Network where everybody ends up screaming out their window, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." And they took it. We're here 50 years later.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Jay, thanks so much for the time. We're gonna look out for your new book, which is getting released on December 5th. The Secret That Is Not a Secret.
And you can find me on the interwebs. My Substack is just jmichaelson.substack.com. And it's the newsletter is called Both. And it's a lot about what we've just been doing, the sort of ethical, spiritual, psychological look at politics and an engaged look at spirituality.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. Jay, I'm recording, then maybe you and I could wrap up for a couple minutes.
Sure thing.
Moment.